Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city, and we start. John Ramsey always believed that his life was like an operating room. Everything is under control, every step is verified, every mistake is unacceptable. At 42, he was a heart surgeon whose name was buzzing in Chicago medical circles. His hands, firm and precise, saved hearts that other doctors would have long since written off. He built everything he dreamed of, a mansion in the suburbs of Evanston, a reputation that opened doors to the best clinics, a family that was set as an example. But in recent days, something in this ideal picture has begun to crumble. He stood at the sink in the residence room, washing his hands after another operation, coronary artery bypass surgery, 7 hours without the right to misfire. The mirror above the sink reflected his face, dark hair streaked with gray, tired hazel eyes, slight wrinkles carved by years of stress. He was in great shape for his age, but today he felt older. Not just fatigue, something deeper. The itching in the groin that started a couple of weeks ago has become unbearable. Redness, burning, and now also pain when urinating. At first he chalked it up to irritation or infection, but the symptoms persisted. Yesterday he took tests, blood, urine, swabs in a private laboratory away from the prying eyes of his colleagues. Results were promised tomorrow. John knew that this could not be ignored. He saw how patients put off visits to the doctor and how it ended. He wiped his hands and walked out into the hospital corridor, where the lights hummed and the smell of disinfection smelled. His life was here within sterile walls, where he was a god and an executioner at the same time. Melissa, his wife, and Lucas, their son, were waiting for him at home. Melissa, 37, was a medical project coordinator at a private clinic, smart, beautiful, with a smile that could convince donors to fork over millions. Lucas, an 11-year-old whirlwind of energy, was already tinkering with code for his brilliant apps, dreaming of eclipsing Silicon Valley. John gave them everything: a house with a lake view, schools with elite programs, a future without worries. So why did he feel like something was slipping away? In the residence room, he was met by Raj Patel, a fellow pulmonologist, sitting with his feet on the table and scrolling through the news on his phone. Raj was younger, easygoing and sharp-tongued, making him a rare exception in the world of hospital intrigue. "Ramsey, you look like you were run over by a truck," Raj grinned, not looking up from the screen. "How many hours in the operating room today?" "7," John muttered, opening the refrigerator and taking out a bottle of water. "The patient will live. Are you on shift?" "Thank God, no. Free like the wind. It wouldn't hurt you either, you know. When was the last time you took a vacation?" John chuckled as he unscrewed the cap. "Rest for those who do not have a pager." "Well, you're in vain. Seriously, John, you're on edge. Yesterday in the cafeteria, you were staring at one point like a zombie. Melissa doesn't notice. The wife's name was cut like a scalpel." John took a sip, collecting his thoughts. Melissa was acting strange. In recent months, she had been missing at work until late, returning with excuses about meetings and contracts. Her phone became an extension of her hand messages, calls, always something urgent. Last week, he noticed her smiling while typing something at 2 in the morning. "Working group," she said when he asked. He didn't dig. Love is trust, not suspicion. But the prick in the chest was not only due to symptoms. "She's busy," he said finally. "Some new projects. Pharmacists, sponsors, everything is as usual." Raj narrowed his eyes, but did not press. "Okay, but tell her not to forget about your hero in a robe. You two are like something out of a TV series about an ideal life." John forced a smile, but it came out strained. "Yeah, something like that." He went into his office, a small fortress with a window overlooking Lake Michigan, where the desk was littered with papers and there was a framed family photo on a shelf. Summer, Cubs game, Lucas with a hot dog in his hand, Melissa laughing, clinging to John. Everything was simpler then. He pulled out his phone, a message from Melissa. "I'll be late, dinner with a client." Lucas is with the neighbors. Love you. He read it 3 times. Client. Again. Answer okay, I love you remained unwritten. Instead, he opened the laboratory portal. No results. Delay, probably. He closed his laptop and rubbed his face. The itching in the groin reminded me of itself, like an annoying alarm signal. Infection? Allergies? Or something worse? He was a doctor, but now he felt like a patient helpless in the face of the unknown. That evening, John pulled into the driveway of their home in Evanston, a brick mansion with white shutters and a lawn that cost the gardener a fortune. The windows are dark. Melissa has not returned yet. Lucas is with his neighbor Sarah. The silence of the house was almost palpable. John dropped his briefcase in the hallway and headed towards the bar. Bourbon, a couple of ice cubes. He rarely drank, but today alcohol seemed to be his only anchor. He walked into the living room, where the walls contained their history. A wedding in the California sun, Lucas in a dinosaur costume for Halloween, a trip to Aspen. His eyes catch on the photo from their 12th anniversary, Melissa in an emerald dress, her eyes sparkling as he wraps his arms around her waist. Then he thought that their marriage was like his operations, complex but controllable. Now he wasn't so sure. The phone vibrated. Voice message from the laboratory assistant, Tom. Dr. Ramsey, this is Tom from the laboratory. Your tests are ready, but Dr. Wilson wants to talk to you himself. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning. I won't say anything, but it's better not to delay. Call me if anything happens. John listened back to the message, every word hitting his nerves. I won't say anything is code for bad news. He knew this better than others. My thoughts started spinning. Urinary tract infection, prostatitis, venereal disease. He drove the last one away. Melissa was his only one. They had been together since residency. But itching, redness, pain. It's not just like that. He finished the bourbon, the ice clinking in the empty glass. Tomorrow. Everything tomorrow. He had to be strong for Lucas, for Melissa, for himself. But in the depths of my soul, something whispered, this is not only the body, this is life. In downtown Chicago, at a restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows, Melissa Ramsey laughed as she held a glass of wine. Opposite her sat a man, about 40, wearing a suit that cost more than a nurse's monthly salary. His gaze was warm but predatory. They spoke quietly, their knees almost touching under the table. Her phone was in her purse, the screen was silent. She looked at the time, 10:15 p.m. We should go. John is probably at home, sorting out papers or watching the news. Always so predictable. Once upon a time, this calmed her down. Now it was annoying. More wine? The man asked, his voice like an invitation. Melissa smiled, a little longer than necessary. Let's. At home, John sat in the dark. The glass in his hand had long warmed up. He didn't hear Melissa return after midnight, didn't notice how she walked past, leaving a trail of someone else's perfume behind her. He didn't see her go upstairs, thinking he was asleep. But John didn't sleep. He stared into space, the voicemail echoing in his head. Something's wrong. And as the night deepened, he felt a crack appearing in his world, not only in his body, but also in what he considered unshakable. Tomorrow he will find out the truth. About myself. About her. About them. The morning in Chicago was as gray as an X-ray. John Ramsey drove to the hospital, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Skyscrapers flashed outside the window, but he did not see them. Tom's voice from the laboratory was spinning in my head. Dr. Wilson wants to talk to you himself. It's better not to delay. John knew that tone. He'd said it to patients hundreds of times when the news was bad. Itching in the groin, redness, pain when urinating, symptoms that he tried to ignore now sounded like a siren. He repeated to himself that it was probably a simple infection. Antibiotics, a week of rest, and that's it. But something heavy was tossing and turning in his chest, and it was not connected with his body. He parked at a hospital not his own, but a private clinic on the other side of town where no one knew him. It's too risky to show up in your own walls with such complaints. A heart surgeon with the reputation of a god cannot afford to be weak. He straightened the collar of his coat and entered the hall, which smelled of coffee and sterility. The receptionist, a tired-eyed young woman, led him to Dr. Wilson's office. James Wilson was an old-school urologist, balding, with thick-rimmed glasses and a way of speaking that seemed to weigh every word. John knew him from conferences, but they had never been close. This is for the best. Less emotions, more facts. John, glad to see you, even under such circumstances. Wilson rose from the table, extending his hand. His smile was professional, but his eyes betrayed wariness. Take a seat. John sank into the chair, feeling the leather creaking under his weight. He suddenly realized that he didn't want to be here. Doesn't want to hear what Wilson has to say. But there was nowhere to retreat. Let's get to the point, James, he said, trying to sound even. What did the tests show? Wilson opened the folder on the table, but was in no hurry to speak. He took off his glasses and wiped them with a napkin, a gesture that John had seen doctors make before a difficult conversation. His heart beat faster, although he taught himself to control his pulse. Your symptoms: itching, redness, pain when urinating pointed to several possible causes. Wilson began. We checked everything: urinary tract infections, prostatitis, even allergic reactions. But the results of the smear and PCR, he paused, looking into John's eyes. You have chlamydia, John. The word fell like a scalpel onto a steel tray. John froze. His mind, accustomed to sorting chaos into parts, stumbled. Chlamydia, bacterial infection. It is transmitted sexually. He heard this 1,000 times, explained it to patients, prescribed azithromycin, advised them to notify their partners. But now it was about him, about his body. Chlamydia? He asked, his voice hoarse, as if his throat was being squeezed. You are sure? Wilson nodded, flipping through the papers. PCR confirmed. Chlamydia trachomatis, without a doubt. Positive smear and antibody results. I can show you the data if you want. John raised his hand to stop him. No need, I believe. He looked past Wilson, at the diplomas on the wall, but saw only emptiness. Chlamydia. His mind ran through the facts like a medical reference. An incubation period of 1 to 3 weeks, often asymptomatic in women, contagious through any contact. Treated with antibiotics, but his thoughts were cut off. He didn't sleep with anyone except Melissa. The last time they were close was 2 weeks ago, a rare moment when she didn't brush it off, citing fatigue. There were no other women. Never. In 15 years of marriage, he had never looked the other way. John, are you okay? Wilson's voice brought him back to the office. I know this is unexpected, but it's not the end of the world. A course of antibiotics, doxycycline, 7 days, and you'll be clean. The main thing is that your partner. He stopped short, apparently remembering that John was married. Melissa should get checked too. Standard procedure. Melissa. The wife's name struck like a second lightning strike. John felt the blood pounding in his temples. He nodded, but his thoughts had already wandered far from the office. Melissa. Her late evenings. Her phone, which she now hid as a state secret. Her excuses are clients, projects, donors. 2 weeks ago, she was in his bed, her hair spilling over the pillow, her lips whispering his name. Or was it a lie? John. Wilson leaned forward. Can you hear me? Yes, he managed, returning to reality. Sorry, just trying to wrap my head around it. Understand, this is a shock. But listen, it can be treated. There are no complications if you start now. I'll write out a prescription and we'll do a follow-up in a couple of weeks. Wilson took the pen, but his gaze lingered on John. Do you want to discuss? What's next? With Melissa? John shook his head. No, I'll figure it out. He stood up, although his legs seemed foreign. Wilson held out the recipe and instructions, but John barely glanced at them. He muttered something about gratitude and walked out, feeling the walls of the office shrinking. In the car, John sat motionless, staring at the steering wheel. Chlamydia. The word throbbed in my head like a wound. He knew how it was transmitted. Knew he couldn't catch it anywhere but in bed. His bed. Their beds. He closed his eyes, remembering Melissa, her smile, her touch, her voice when she said, I love you. All this now seemed alien, like a mask that he did not notice. He took out his phone and opened their correspondence. Last message from her, yesterday. I'll be late, dinner with a client. Love you. He stared at the words until they began to blur. Client. Which client? Who? His fingers trembled, but he did not write. Didn't call. Not now. He wasn't ready. John leaned back in his seat, feeling anger and pain mingling in his chest. He always trusted her. From the first day they met in residency, she with her ambitions, he with his stubbornness. They built a life together, a home, Lucas, a future. He gave her everything. And what did she give in return? Disease, lie, betrayal. The word flashed through his mind like an alarm. Betrayal. He didn't want to believe it. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he's wrong. But the facts were inexorable. Chlamydia does not appear out of thin air. Someone was in her life. Someone he didn't know about. He started the car, but did not drive home. Instead, he headed to the pharmacy, where he silently picked up some antibiotics. The cashier, an elderly woman, looked at him with sympathy, and John felt a pang of shame. He, the doctor who saved lives, is now a patient with a prescription for a shameful disease. But shame quickly gave way to cold rage. This is not his shame. This is hers. The house was quiet. Lucas was at school. Melissa was at another meeting. John stood in the kitchen, looking at the bottle of pills. Doxycycline. 7 days and his body will be clean. But what to do with the soul? He opened the bottle and swallowed the first dose with water. The taste was as bitter as his thoughts. He walked into the bedroom, where the bed was neatly made. Her pillow smelled like her shampoo lavender and something else he hadn't noticed before. He sat on the edge of the mattress, looking at her nightstand. Her book lay there, the bookmark sticking out in the middle. Nearby is a phone charger. Nothing unusual, but now everything seemed like evidence. John covered his face with his hands. He didn't know what to do next. Should I ask her? Directly to the forehead. Who did you sleep with? Or wait, watch, pick up the pieces. He was a surgeon. He knew how to find a problem and cut it at the root. But this was not an operation. This was his life. For the first time in years, he felt like he was losing control. Not over the patient's heart, but over your own. And in this emptiness, a new emotion began to grow, not just pain, but something cold, sharp. Determination. If Melissa betrayed him, he will know the truth. And then she will pay. John Ramsey always knew how to control himself. In the operating room, where a second separated life from death, his pulse remained steady and his hands remained steady. But now, sitting at dinner in their Evanston home, he felt control slipping away. Across from him, Melissa was picking at her salad, her gaze continually falling on the phone lying next to her plate. Lucas, their 11-year-old son, chattered about the new level of his game, not noticing how the air in the room was thickening. John looked at his wife. Cold, silently. A volcano was blazing inside him. The diagnosis of chlamydia 2 days ago was like a grenade that blew up his world. He could still hear Dr. Wilson's voice. Chlamydia trachomatis, without a doubt. Treatable with antibiotics, yes. But what came with this knowledge cannot be treated. John didn't sleep with other women. Never. The last time I was with Melissa was 2 weeks ago, her initiative, a rare moment of intimacy after months of excuses. Now he knew. She brought more than herself to their bed, and he didn't say a word to her. Not yet. Lucas, stop playing at the table, Melissa said without looking up from her phone. Her voice was harsh, not like usual. Eat normally. I'm eating. Lucas rolled his eyes, but put the tablet down. Dad, have you seen the new trailer for Star Wars? There's such a ship. Aha, John muttered, not taking his eyes off Melissa. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She quickly typed something and put the phone in her jeans pocket. Her cheeks turned slightly pink. Nervousness? Shame? Or nothing? John tried to read it like a medical history, but the symptoms were foreign. You're late today, he finally said evenly, as if he was asking about the weather. Clients again? Melissa looked up, her blue eyes meeting him. For a split second, he noticed a shadow, something he had never seen before. But she immediately smiled, the same smile that once made him fall in love. Yes, a new project, she answered, brushing her hair behind her ear. Pharmaceutical company, a lot of papers. You know how it goes. I know, John nodded. His voice was calm, but everything was boiling inside. He saw her reaching for a glass of wine, her fingers trembling slightly. I saw her avoid his gaze, pretending to listen to Lucas. He's seen too much. After dinner, Lucas ran off to his room while Melissa began putting away the dishes. John remained seated, watching. She moved quickly, almost fussily, as if she wanted to keep her hands busy. The phone reappeared, a brief glance at the screen, a slight grimace, then she tucked it into her back pocket. John felt his jaw tighten. "Everything is fine?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. His tone was almost casual, but his eyes bored into hers. Melissa paused at the sink, then turned around with a slight chuckle. "Certainly. I'm just tired. Long day." "Uh-huh," he said, and that was all. He didn't press. Not now. But her every gesture, every word was now under a microscope. He noticed everything. How she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. How her laughter became sharper, almost artificial. How she avoided long conversations, going into work or fatigue. This was not the Melissa he had known for 15 years. Or maybe he just never knew her. Over the next few days, John became a shadow of his former self. He performed operations, smiled at his colleagues, joked with Lucas, but his mind was occupied with one thing: observation. He began to notice details that he had previously missed. Melissa now left home earlier and returned later. Her wardrobe has changed: more tight dresses, new perfume, sharp, with a hint of musk. She began wearing makeup more often, even for regular meetings. And the phone, it was like her second skin. She set it to silent mode, but John saw the screen light up, her furtively reading messages, her lips pursing, and then spreading into a barely noticeable smile. One evening, while Lucas was at football practice, John was sitting in the living room with a magazine, pretending to read. Melissa walked in, throwing her bag on the couch. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks were flushed, as if after a run. She didn't notice him right away. She grabbed her phone and started typing, her fingers flying across the screen. John coughed. She shuddered, almost dropping her phone. "God, John, you scared me," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. "I thought you were in the office." "I decided to rest," he answered, without looking up from the magazine. His voice was cold as steel. "You're late today." "Yes, the meeting went on for a long time." She turned away, putting the phone in her bag. "These sponsors, I always want to rewrite everything." "I see," he said, turning the page. He didn't look at her, but he felt her tension. She stood there for a second, then muttered something about a shower and went upstairs. John remained seated, listening to the creaking of the steps. His heart was pounding, but his face was stony. He imagined himself grabbing her phone, opening her messages, seeing the truth. But he didn't move. Not yet. He needed more. Needed to know. At night, John lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. Melissa slept next to him. Her breathing was even, but he could not relax. Her smell, that same new perfume, filled the room, and it was like a slap in the face. He remembered their last intimacy, 2 weeks ago. She was different, then persistent, almost aggressive, as if she was proving something. Now he understood. This was not about him. It was about someone else. Chlamydia was a gift she brought home, and he swallowed antibiotics to cleanse his body, but his soul was burning. He turned his head, looking at her silhouette. She looked the same as always, her blonde hair spread out across the pillow, her lips slightly parted. But now he saw someone else's. Traitor. The woman who destroyed everything he built. His fingers clenched into a fist under the blanket. He wanted to shake her, shout, "Who is he? How could you?" But he was silent. Silence was his weapon. He will watch. Wait. Collect pieces until the puzzle is complete. In the morning, Melissa left early, saying that she had an urgent meeting. John nodded without even looking up from his coffee. When the door closed behind her, he took out his phone and opened their shared calendar. She added an event, dinner with the team, 7 p.m. He stared at the recording. Team. Another lie? He didn't know, but he will find out. John was like a machine gun that day in the hospital. He performed 2 operations, answered questions from students, and listened to Raj, who again made fun of his zombie appearance. But his thoughts were at home, with Melissa, with her phone, her excuses, her new perfume. He didn't say a word about the diagnosis, didn't ask if she was checked. He knew that if she didn't know, that was her problem. And if she knows and remains silent, that's her verdict. In the evening, he picked up Lucas from training. The boy was chatting about the ball that almost hit the goal, and John was smiling, but his thoughts were cold. He thought about Melissa, who was probably sitting in the restaurant right now, laughing with the team. Or with someone alone. He imagined her smile, her hand on someone else's shoulder, her lips whispering a name that was not his. The volcano inside him was rushing to come out, but he kept it in check. Bye. When they returned home, Melissa had not yet arrived. John sent Lucas to do his homework and sat in the living room, looking at her bag, forgotten on the sofa. The phone was inside. He saw her put it there in the morning. His fingers trembled. One step, and he could find out everything. But he didn't get up. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to be sure. I wanted her to give herself away. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. His heart beat evenly, as if in the operating room, but inside he was different. Not a life-saving surgeon, a person who begins to see the enemy, and this enemy slept in his bed. John Ramsey is accustomed to revealing the truth with surgical precision. In the operating room, he found the problem a clot, a rupture, a blockage, and eliminated it. But now his scalpel was useless. The chlamydia he'd learned about 4 days ago wasn't just an infection. It was a landmine planted in the foundation of his marriage. Melissa, his wife, his partner, his love, became a stranger. Her late returns, nervous glances at the phone, new perfume, everything screamed of betrayal. And John, instead of shouting back, remained silent. He looked. I was waiting, but patience was running out. Friday evening was quiet. Lucas spent the night with a friend. Melissa left for another meeting with the team. John sat in their home office, looking at her laptop. She left it on the table, casually, as if she didn't expect him to look. In the past, he wouldn't. John trusted her 15 years of marriage, common dreams, a son. But now the trust was dead. He opened the lid. The screen lit up, asking for a password. His fingers froze. He knew her habits. Melissa was not paranoid. He typed, Lucas 2013, the year of their son's birth +1. The screen is unlocked. John exhaled, feeling his heart pounding against his ribs. This was wrong. It was necessary. He opened the browser, checking the history. Nothing unusual. Work sites, articles about pharmaceuticals, online stores. Then he went to the post office. Melissa did not log out of her account, another mistake of hers. The inbox was filled with work emails, but one stood out. The sender was GW. The subject was dinner. John clicked. Mel, 1930, as agreed. Don't be late. I booked a table by the window. G. The date is the day before yesterday. John remembered that evening. Melissa returned after midnight. Her cheeks were burning. She muttered something about long negotiations. He reread the letter. Nothing explicit, but the tone was too warm, too personal. He looked for other letters from GW. There were several of them, short, neutral, about meetings, schedules, the project. Not a word about love, about sex, about anything that can be added to the case. But John knew. The truth is hidden in the unsaid. He opened the messenger built into her work account. GW was there too. The correspondence was scant. A discussion of some kind of contract, a couple of emoticons, nothing more. John felt his anger boil. She was careful. Too careful. These are not work chats. This is a disguise. He slammed the laptop shut, but everything inside was burning. The superficial evidence was worse than nothing it teased, but did not provide an answer. He needed the truth. All. The next day, John did something he had never thought of. During his lunch break, he left the hospital and drove to a nondescript office in downtown Chicago. The sign read, Murphy's Private Investigations. He found him through an old college friend who once boasted that he had unearthed his wife's infidelity in a week. John then laughed. Now he sat in the car, looking at the peeling door, and felt like his life was going downhill. The inside smelled of cigarettes and coffee. Paul Murphy, the detective, was a stocky man in his 50s with a face that looked like it had been carved from oak. His eyes, tenacious and tired, immediately assessed John an expensive suit, a tense jaw, the look of a man on the edge. Dr. Ramsey, right? Murphy pointed to a chair. Take a seat. What led? John sat down, feeling uncomfortable. He was used to offices overlooking the lake, not this room with cracked blinds. But he came for answers, not for comfort. My wife, he began, his voice low, almost mechanical. I think she's cheating on me. I need to know. Murphy nodded as if he had heard this 1,000 times. Understood. Are there any facts, suspicions, anything specific? John said, not everything, not about chlamydia, that was too personal, but about her behavior. Late evenings, telephone, nervousness, correspondence with GW. He spoke evenly, as if on a round, but his fists were clenched under the table. Okay, Murphy said, making notes. Name, address, job, habits. Everything you know about her. And about GW, if you have any guesses. Melissa Ramsey, 37, medical project coordinator at Grace Clinic. About GW. I don't know. Maybe someone from her circle. John hesitated. She's careful. Very. Murphy chuckled. They are always careful. So far, they are not mistaken. I'll start with observation, checking her movements and connections. If there is someone, I will find it. A week, maybe 2. 5,000 advance, the rest according to the result. Is it coming? John nodded, taking out his checkbook. Money didn't matter. True, it did. He signed the contract, shook Murphy's hand, and left, feeling strangely relieved. He took a step. Now all that was left was to wait. The week dragged on like an operation without anesthesia. John continued to watch Melissa, but now with a cold detachment. She didn't notice, or she pretended to. Her delays became regular. Meetings, dinners, deadlines. She smiled at Lucas and joked at breakfast, but with John she was reserved, almost formal. Her phone now always had a password, and she even took it into the bathroom. John was silent, but her every gesture cut deeper. He completed a course of antibiotics, but this did not bring peace. Chlamydia left the body, but left a scar on the soul. He didn't tell her about the diagnosis or ask if she'd been tested. If she knew and remained silent, it was her sin. If she didn't know, it was her blindness. Either way, she was guilty. On the 8th day, Murphy called. John was in the hospital between surgeries. He went into his office, closed the door, and answered. Ramsey, this is Murphy. There is news. Shall we meet? Speak, John said, his voice firm but his palms sweaty. Murphy coughed. Okay, but this is not a telephone conversation. Anyway, your wife. She's not having dinner with the team. There is a man. Regularly. I followed it 3 times restaurants, a bar, once a motel outside the city. I have a photo, but you'd better see it for yourself. John felt the floor disappear from under his feet. Who is he? Gavin Walsh, plastic surgeon, works at Elite Clinic. 41 years old, divorced, still has the same reputation, nurses, assistants, even patients. The guy doesn't miss the skirt. With your wife. This is not a one-time meeting. They are close. Very. Gavin Walsh. GW, the name hit like a hammer. John knew him not personally, but through rumors. Walsh was a plastic surgery star, cocky, with a shark smile and playboy attitude. At conferences, he was always the center of attention, surrounded by women, his jokes too loud and his suits too expensive. John remembered once seeing him with Melissa at some event. She was laughing. He was leaning a little closer to her than necessary. John didn't think anything of it then. Now it was evidence. You are sure? He asked, although he knew the answer. The photos don't lie, Doc. Do you want me to send it? Or we'll meet and I'll show you everything. There are also records, calls, routes. They don't really hide. John closed his eyes. The volcano he had been holding back was bursting out. Melissa and Gavin. Motel. Her laugh, her hands, her lips, everything that belonged to him was now stolen. He imagined her in someone else's bed, and it was like a knife in the heart. The photos have arrived, he finally said, and that's all there is. It will be done. What's next? Dig deeper, or... Murphy hesitated. Is that your business? I'll decide, John snapped. Thank you. He hung up and sat down, looking at the empty table. His hands shook for the first time in years. Gavin Walsh. The name burned. He knew the truth would hurt, but this was worse. This was not just betrayal. It was a choice. Melissa chose this man, this braggart, knowing that he was destroying their family, knowing that he is betraying Lucas, knowing that he was lying to John's face. An hour later, Murphy sent the files. John didn't open them right away. He left the office, went to the staff room, poured coffee, pretending that everything was fine. But inside he was different. Not a surgeon. Not my husband. A person who begins to plan. Not revenge, not yet. But something cold, sharp, like his scalpel. He returned home late. Melissa was in the living room, leafing through a magazine, her phone lying next to her. She smiled as if nothing had happened. Long day? She asked. Yes, John answered, looking into her eyes. Very long. He walked past without touching her. His gaze was icy, but she didn't notice, or she pretended to. John Ramsey has always prided himself on his coolness. In the operating room, where life hung in the balance, he was a machine, heartbeat exactly 60, hands like steel, mind as clear as an X-ray. Now that same discipline has become his shield. Chlamydia, correspondence, the detective's report, everything confirmed. Melissa betrayed him. With Gavin Walsh, a plastic surgeon whose reputation was as polished as his suits and as dirty as his motel trysts. John could have exploded screaming, breaking dishes, throwing her out of the house. But that wasn't his style. He won't be a patient writhing in pain. He will be a surgeon, and his revenge will be as precise as a cut through the aorta. Monday morning started with the usual routine. Lucas ran off to school. Melissa left for work, abandoning the duty, I love you. John nodded, his face a mask of calm. She did not see how his eyes were watching her, not with pain, but with calculation. Yesterday's call from Murphy, the private detective, was the last straw. Everything is there, Doc. Photos, videos, routes, ready to meet. John made an appointment for the evening, but he already knew that the truth would be difficult, and he was ready to accept it. That afternoon, he went to a medical conference in downtown Chicago, an annual gathering where doctors brag about their accomplishments and sponsors look for people to bribe. John hated these events, but today he was drawn to them. He knew Gavin would be there, and he wanted to look him in the eye. The hall was filled with the hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of expensive cologne. John moved between the groups, shaking hands, nodding at compliments about his latest article. His gaze scanned the crowd until it settled on a familiar figure. Gavin Walsh stood at the bar, wearing a dark blue suit and a smile that screamed self-confidence. He was flirting with a young woman, a nurse. According to her badge, his hand lay casually on the counter, his fingers tapping in time with her laughter. John felt his blood boil, but his face remained motionless. He walked up, as if by chance, and coughed. Walsh, he said, his voice even, almost friendly. Long time no see. Gavin turned around, his eyebrows raised, but his smile didn't waver. Ramsey, damn, how many years? Do you darn all your hearts? He extended his hand, his grip was firm, almost defiant. John shook it, looking straight into her eyes. Dark brown, with a spark of arrogance. The eyes of the man who slept with his wife, who laughed at him behind his back, who thought he was safe. Yes, it's still there, John answered, allowing a slight smile to touch his lips. And you? Are you tightening up your face? Gavin laughed, too loudly. Faces, noses, everything that pays. You should take a look, John. I can give you a discount. He winked, clearly enjoying himself. John nodded, his smile widening, but his eyes were as cold as an operating lamp. Maybe someday. See you later, Gavin. He walked away, feeling anger with every step. Gavin didn't even suspect, didn't see that John knew. This was his advantage. He won't make a scene. He won't wave his fists. He will cut slowly, precisely, until Gavin and Melissa realize that they have lost everything. That evening, John met Murphy at a diner on the outskirts of town, a place where no one asked questions. The detective was waiting in a corner booth with a folder and a flash drive in front of him. His face was gloomy but businesslike. "It's all here," Murphy said, moving the folder. "Photos, routes, call records, and video. I warned you, it's tough. Are you sure you want to see this?" John nodded, his voice firm. "Yes, all." Murphy shrugged, as if abdicating responsibility. "Okay, but I warned you. Walsh is the same guy. He and your wife have been dating for at least 3 months. Restaurants, bars, Sunset Motel on Route 94. Video from there, cameras in the corridor, and in the room. Don't ask how you got it." John picked up the folder and flash drive, his fingers cold. "How much do I owe?" "The balance is 3,000. But if you need more tell me. I'm in." "That's enough for now," John said, taking out an envelope of cash. "Thank you, Paul." Murphy nodded and walked away, leaving John alone. He didn't open the folder right away. Instead, he went home, locked himself in his office, and inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen lit up, showing a list of files. Photo: Melissa and Gavin in a restaurant, her hand on his shoulder, his lips near her ear. Documents: addresses, dates, phone numbers. And a video: 2 files. Corridor _ 20250403. MP4 and number _ 20250403. MP4. John clicked on the first one. Motel camera, grainy but clear. Melissa and Gavin walk down the hallway. She laughs. He puts his arm around her waist. Her dress is the same red one she wore for their anniversary 2 years ago. They enter the room. The door closes. The video ends. He opened the second one. His fingers trembled, but he forced himself to look. The camera in the room is hidden, perhaps in a lamp or clock. The quality is better than he would like. Melissa sits on the bed. Gavin leans over and kisses her. Her hands reach for his shirt, his for her dress. John saw everything: her smile, her size, her body, which once belonged only to him. He watched as they merged, as she whispered something that he could not hear. He watched until the end, until the screen went dark. The silence in the office was deafening. John didn't move. His face was motionless, like a statue, but inside everything was screaming. He saw her lies, her betrayal, her choices. Gavin Walsh, with his grin and reputation, was no fluke. She wanted him. She chose him. And now John knew everything. He closed the laptop. His breathing was even, but a fire was raging in his chest. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He stood up, put the flash drive in the safe, and went down to the kitchen. He poured some water and drank it slowly, as if washing away the taste of what he had seen. He then went up to the bedroom where Melissa was sleeping, unaware that he knew. Her face was calm, almost innocent. He looked at her for a second, then turned away. She was a stranger. The next day, John came to the hospital earlier than usual. He had an operation replacement of the aortic valve, complex, but routine for him. He walked into the pre-op room and pulled on his gloves, feeling the latex wrap around his fingers. This ritual always calmed him down, but today it was different. Every gesture, hand washing, mask, gown was part of something larger. Another operation had already begun in his head, not on the patient's heart, on Melissa's life. He imagined how he would cut not her flesh, but everything she valued: her career, her reputation, her future. He knew her weaknesses, her ambition, her pride, her fear of being nothing. He will find a way. Not now, not today, but soon. Gavin won't leave either. His smile, his arrogance, his hands on Melissa, all this will be paid. John didn't know how exactly, but he knew it would be clean, surgically. In the operating room, he picked up a scalpel. The patient lay under anesthesia. The monitors beat steadily. John made the first cut. Blood came out as always. But his thoughts were far away. He saw Melissa, her laugh on video, her lies at dinner. He saw Gavin wink at the conference, and he saw himself not the victim, but the one holding the knife. "Clamp," he said to the assistant, his voice as calm as a lake before a storm. He worked for 3 hours, saving someone else's heart. But on his own, there was no longer room for forgiveness, just for the plan. Cold. Exactly. Lethal for their world. John Ramsey knew how to cut a problem down to the bone. In the operating room, he found the source of pain, a blood clot, a rupture, a weak valve, and eliminated it in one motion. Now his goal was different, not salvation, but destruction. Melissa betrayed him with Gavin Walsh, a plastic surgeon whose impudence was as flamboyant as his reputation as a ladies' man. The video John had watched 2 days ago still burned in his mind. Her laughter, her hands, her body given to another. He could storm into their bedroom and throw the truth in her face, but that would be too easy, too dirty. His revenge will be purer, like a scalpel cut precise, bloodless, deadly for her world. He started as a lawyer. On Wednesday morning, after Melissa left for another meeting and Lucas was at school, John parked in front of a discreet office building in downtown Chicago. The sign read, Keller and Associates, Family Law. He chose this firm on the recommendation of a colleague who went through a divorce and came out with full custody and half his fortune. John didn't want to share anything, not Lucas, not money, not dignity. But he knew, this requires a plan, not emotions. Allison Keller, the lawyer, was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut glass. Her office was sterile, like an operating room, but instead of instruments there were folders and a laptop. She shook John's hand, pointed to the chair, and got down to business. "Dr. Ramsey, you mentioned divorce and custody," she began, opening her notebook. "Tell me what's happening. The more details, the better." John sat up, his posture straight, like a soldier's. He spoke evenly, as if he was dictating a medical history. Melissa's betrayal, evidence from the detective, her relationship with Gavin Walsh. He didn't mention chlamydia, it was too personal and not necessary for the case. But he talked about videos, photos, correspondence. About her lies, her evenings, her disregard for their family. Keller listened, taking notes. Her face remained neutral, but John noticed the slight narrowing of her eyes when he mentioned the motel. "Okay," she said, putting down her pen. "You have a strong position. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, so infidelity does not directly affect the division of property. But she can influence custody if we prove that her behavior is harmful to the child. Lucas is 11, right?" "Yes," John nodded. "He doesn't know anything. And it shouldn't." "Agree. The courts are leaning toward joint custody, but if we show that she's, say, unstable or neglectful of the family, you might get the upper hand. What about finances? Joint accounts, assets?" John said, "A house in Evanston, 2 accounts, a common one and his personal one, investments, pension funds." Melissa made good money, but John was the main breadwinner. Keller nodded, her fingers running over the keyboard. "First, we collect everything. Bank statements, taxes, bills for the last 3 years. If she spends family money on her hobbies, it will work against her. Second, guardianship. We need to show that you are a stable parent. Lucas lives with you, you support him, participate in his life. Third, evidence of treason. Video, photo, detective reports save everything. This is not for the court, but for pressure. If she wants to fight, we will use this to force her to retreat." John felt cold satisfaction. It was a plan, not rage, but strategy. How much time? Months, if peacefully. A year, if she persists. Let's start with the documents. I'll prepare a draft divorce petition, but we won't file it yet. First, let's strengthen your position. Keller looked into his eyes. "Are you ready for this, doctor?" "Yes," he said, and it was true. He was ready to cut. Returning home, John began to act. He collected documents, bank statements, mortgage payments, Luca's school accounts. He worked methodically as before the operation, putting everything into folders. But that was only part of the plan. He needed a trap, something that would show Melissa for who she was, and he knew how to do it. Their family account was a joint account, but John had long ago limited her access, transferring most of the funds to his personal account. Melissa didn't complain her salary was enough, and he paid for the house and Lucas. Now he decided to change the rules. In the evening, he logged into his bank account and removed the restrictions, giving her full access. He added notifications. Every transfer, every purchase will be sent to him by email. If she spends on Gavin on restaurants, hotels, gifts, he will know, and this will become another piece of evidence. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the screen. This was not just a financial ploy. It was bait. Melissa loved comfort, loved to impress. If she takes the bait, her own spending will strangle her in court. John closed his laptop, feeling the corners of his lips lift slightly. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control. Melissa didn't have to wait long. The next day, John received his first notice, a $230 charge at the El Etoile restaurant in downtown Chicago. He knew this place expensive, overlooking the river, where couples ordered wine for $100. Melissa said she was going to a corporate party. John was silent as she left, her new dress hugging her figure a little more than necessary for her colleagues. He nodded, kissed her on the cheek. His hand was cold. She didn't notice. 2 days later, another one. $450, Wyndham Spa Hotel outside the city. Outside meeting, she said in the morning, packing her bag. John watched her apply makeup, her fingers nervously fiddling with her phone. He smiled, asking if everything was okay. She nodded, too quickly. The notifications kept coming. Lingerie boutique $180, jewelry store $320. John saved each one, adding it to a folder labeled Evidence. She spent without thinking that each transaction was a nail in her coffin. He watched her at home, his gaze like a laser. She didn't notice or didn't want to notice. Her laughter became louder, almost artificial, as she spoke to Lucas. With John, she was polite, but distant, like a neighbor, not a wife. Her phone now lived in her hand. Messages came even at night. John didn't ask. He knew, and that was enough. He met with Keller again on Friday. She looked through his file transcripts, Lucas's school reports, John's schedule, where he noted each day spent with his son. He then showed the bank notices. Smart, Keller said, flipping through the list of expenses. She uses the family account for personal pleasures. This is not direct evidence of betrayal, but it shows her priorities. If she spends it on her lover and not on her son, the court will notice it. Keep collecting, and keep yourself in control. No quarrels, no hints. She shouldn't know that you're getting ready. He won't know, said John. His voice was like ice. I know what I'm doing. Keller looked at him with slight concern. You are a surgeon, Dr. Ramsey. I see how you work. But this is not an operating room. Don't overdo it. John nodded, but her words fell on deaf ears. This was operating room. Melissa is a patient whose lies have poisoned his life. Gavin is a metastasis that needs to be cut out, and Lucas was the only thing worth saving. That evening, Melissa returned late, her hair smelling of cigarettes and wine. She threw her bag on the sofa, not noticing John sitting in the darkness of the living room. Long day? He asked, his voice soft, almost gentle. She winced, then smiled. Oh yes, just a blockage. Project, you know. She went to the refrigerator and took out water. Why aren't you sleeping? I think, he said, looking at her back, about the future. She turned around, her smile faltering. Sounds serious. Everything is fine. It couldn't be better, he answered, standing up. He walked past, lightly touching her shoulder. His touch was as cold as steel. She didn't notice how his eyes were shining not from pain, but from the plan that was already working. John went up to the office and opened the safe. There was a flash drive with a video of Melissa and Gavin in the motel, their bodies, their lies. He didn't watch it again. No need. He knew what he would do. The account was ticking, expenses were growing, the folder with evidence was getting fatter. Melissa thought she was safe. She was wrong. He closed the safe and went downstairs. Tomorrow the operation is a triple bypass, complicated, but no more difficult than what he was preparing for her. His hands were ready, his mind too. In recent weeks, John has been observing Melissa not only at home, but also in her professional world. She was the medical project coordinator at Grace Clinic, and her reputation shone almost as brightly as his. Almost. He always considered her work impeccable contracts with pharmaceutical giants, grants, international symposia. He was proud of her when she spoke at conferences, her voice ringing with confidence. But now that the veil of trust had lifted, he began to see what he had previously closed his eyes to. Little things, unpleasant like a pebble in a shoe. It all started with a conversation in the hospital cafeteria. John was drinking coffee, leafing through a magazine, when he heard a snippet of gossip from two administrators at the next table. Grace failed an audit of one of its projects, something related to incorrectly recorded expenses. Melissa's name flashed briefly, but that was enough. John pretended not to listen, but his mind was already activated. Audit, expenses. If she's careless at home, why should her work be perfect? He started digging. Not explicitly, he couldn't afford questions that would arouse suspicion. Instead, he used access to shared systems that linked their hospital to Grace through joint projects. Melissa often shared passwords with him, just in case, she said, and he never used them. Still, late in the evening, locked in his office, he logged into the Grace database under her account. What he found was not an explosion, but a series of small cracks. Reports on her latest project, a partnership with the pharmaceutical company Novartis, were sloppy. Travel expenses were inflated. Tickets to New York, where she allegedly met with donors, cost twice the market price. Hotel bills included a non-work-related minibar and spa. One bill dinner for two at a Manhattan restaurant, $420 was labeled as a work meeting, but the date coincided with her day off, when she was supposedly alone. John remembered her call then. "I'm tired, John. I'll stay at the hotel and rest." He believed. Now he saw the lie. There were other little things too. Emails where she mixed up grant deadlines, forcing colleagues to rewrite applications at the last minute. Minutes of meetings where her signature was on decisions that later raised questions among sponsors. Nothing egregious, no waste, no fraud, but enough to tarnish her reputation if anyone starts digging. And John was going to give this someone a push. He downloaded everything: reports, correspondence, extracts. His fingers worked quickly, as if during surgery, saving files to an encrypted folder on the external drive. He didn't feel guilty. She destroyed their marriage, their family. Now he will destroy her facade, that part of her life where she felt like a queen. The next day, John continued to collect evidence, but more carefully. He noticed how irritable Melissa had become at work. She called him one day to complain about a nagging coworker who was demanding a review of her budget. John listened, his voice sympathetic, but his eyes cold. He knew her mistakes were starting to surface, and he will help them come into the light. The idea for the anonymous complaint came at night, while he was lying in bed, looking at Melissa sleeping. Her breathing was even, but he saw only lies in her. Her career was her armor, what she put above her family, above him. If he took it away, she would feel what it was like to lose. But he will not act openly. It will be as clean as his operations. No one will associate him with the blow. He chose the Illinois Board of Medicine, the body that regulated clinics and doctors. They accepted anonymous complaints, especially if they involved financial irregularities or negligence. John knew how it worked. He himself was on the ethics committee of his hospital. The complaint will trigger a check, and the check will find everything he has prepared. Melissa won't quit right away, but her reputation will be damaged, and cracks tend to grow. In the evening, he sat down at his laptop in his office, connecting to a VPN for anonymity. He composed a letter short, businesslike, without emotion. "Dear council members, potential irregularities in project management were identified at Grace Clinic, Chicago. I recommend checking the financial reports for the Novartis 2024 program, as well as the travel expenses of the coordinator, Melissa Ramsey. I am attaching documents for analysis. Sincerely, concerned citizen. He attached files, reports, letters, invoices, but removed anything that might point to him. His heart beat evenly, as if before a complex operation. He hit send and turned off the computer. The letter has gone. The wheels started spinning. At home, Melissa didn't suspect anything. She returned late. Her bag smelled of a new perfume, sharp, not hers. John was sitting in the living room reading a magazine when she entered. "Oh, are you still awake?" she said, throwing her bag on the sofa. Her voice was light, but her eyes avoided him. "Waiting for you," he replied, his tone almost warm. "How's work?" She shrugged, opening the refrigerator. As usual, blockage. New project, a lot of paperwork. She took out a bottle of wine and poured herself a glass. "And you?" "Saved a couple of hearts," he said, looking at her over the top of the magazine. "Nothing new." She smiled, but the smile was forced. John noticed how her fingers were squeezing the glass a little tighter than necessary. She didn't know what he was seeing. I didn't know what he did, and this was his strength. Bank notifications continued to arrive. This week, she spent $280 at Sienna Restaurant, $150 at a boutique, $600 on a room at the Drake Hotel. John saved everything, adding it to the evidence folder. His trap worked. Melissa, thinking the account was safe, spent on Gavin, on their secret parties, on their lies. Every dollar was a nail he would drive into her future. The next day, John was in the operating room. The patient is a 60-year-old man, heart attack, triple bypass surgery. He worked for 3 hours. His hands moved like clockwork, but his thoughts were far away. He imagined Melissa opening a letter from the council. Her face when she realizes she's being tested. Her panic when her colleagues start whispering. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was preparation. He opened up her life, layer by layer, just as he opened up her chest. After the operation, he went into his office and checked his email. There won't be any news from the council. Anonymity worked both ways. But he knew the letter had arrived. The check will begin soon, maybe in a week, maybe in a month. And when it starts, Melissa will feel the ground disappearing from under her feet. He opened the safe, where there was a flash drive with a video Melissa and Gavin in the motel, their bodies, their betrayal. He didn't look at it again, but its presence was like a pulse. Reminder, Gavin will pay too, but not now. John knew he had to weaken her first, remove her armor, and then a blow. In the evening, he picked up Lucas from football. The boy was chatting about a new trick that was almost successful, and John smiled as he listened. Lucas was the only thing left clean. For his sake, John kept himself under control. For his sake, he made this plan not only for revenge, but to protect his son from her lies. When they returned, Melissa was at home, typing something on her laptop. She looked up and smiled at Lucas, but barely spared John a glance. "Dinner is ready," she said, closing her laptop. "Pizza, your favorite, Lou." "Cool." Lucas ran to the table, and John lingered, looking at her. "Job?" he asked, nodding towards the laptop. "Yes, reports," she answered, too quickly. "Nothing interesting." "Aha," he said, passing by. His voice was calm, but inside he saw her end. Medical advice, her reports, her expenses, all these were the threads he pulled. She'll soon be confused, and then he will complete the operation. John Ramsey knew how to ask questions. In the operating room, he elicited symptoms from patients, picking up on the slightest understatement, a shadow in a voice, a pause before an answer. These details showed where the problem lay. Now he was using the same skill at home. Melissa, his wife, wasn't just a traitor who slept with Gavin Walsh. She carried chlamydia, a disease he treated with antibiotics, swallowing bitter pills along with the truth. He didn't tell her about his diagnosis, didn't ask if she knew. But today he decided to test whether she would lie when he gave her a chance to be honest. In recent days, John has been living on autopilot. He saved hearts in the hospital, smiled at Lucas, collected evidence against Melissa, her spending on hotels and restaurants, her sloppy reports that he anonymously sent to the Illinois Medical Board. His plan was as cold as steel, but anger still simmered inside. The video of her with Gavin at the motel, her lies at dinner, her new perfume, it was all like a poison that he had under control for now. But chlamydia was more than just a personal insult. This was evidence of her guilt. If she knows and is silent, she is lying deliberately. If she doesn't know, she's blind. Either way, he wanted to hear her answer. Friday evening was deceptively calm. Lucas was staying with a friend for the night. The house in Evanston was drowning in silence. John sat in the living room, leafing through a medical journal, but his eyes followed Melissa. She came in from the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, her phone, as always, in her hand. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes, a slight wrinkle on her forehead. But her movements were fast, almost nervous, as if she was afraid to stop. John had been waiting for this moment all week. He put the magazine down, his voice soft, almost caring. "Mel, sit down for a minute," he said, pointing to the sofa opposite. "I want to talk." She froze, her fingers gripping the glass a little tighter. "About what?" she asked, sitting down. Her smile was light, but her eyes were wary. John leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He looked at her carefully, as if he were a patient before a complex operation. "It's just, are you okay?" he began. His tone was even, without a hint of accusation. "You've been kind of tense lately. Are you feeling okay? Is there anything you want to tell me?" The questions were simple, but sharp as a needle. He gave her a way out, a chance to confess, to hint, to show at least a drop of honesty. He knew that she could be a carrier of chlamydia, even if she had no symptoms. In women, they are often hidden. If she knows, she'll understand what he's getting at. If not, her reaction will still give her away. Melissa blinked, her smile faltering. She put the glass on the table, slowly, as if biding her time. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice light, but with a hint of defensiveness in it. "I'm fine, John. Just work. You know how it goes." "I know," he nodded, without looking away. His eyes were cold, but his face remained soft, almost sympathetic. "But you're late. You look tired. I'm worried. If something is wrong, health, stress, whatever you can tell, I'm your husband." He pronounced the word husband a little harder, and it hung in the air. Melissa looked away, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the pillow. John noticed how her breathing became a little faster. She was silent for a second, two, three. Then she laughed shortly, almost naturally. "Jesus, John, you're just like a doctor at an appointment," she said, shaking her head. "It's okay, really. Well, maybe I'm overtired. This project, it's exhausting, but nothing worth talking about." "Nothing like that?" he asked, his voice still soft, but a shadow of steel appeared in it. He tilted his head, as if studying her. "Exactly." She looked at him, her eyes met his, and for a moment John saw something in them: fear, guilt, but she immediately smiled, wider, more confident. "Exactly," she said, standing up. "You think too much. I just need a vacation, that's all." She walked towards the kitchen. Her steps were fast, almost running. John remained seated, looking after her. His face didn't change, but inside he was seething. She lied, right in the eyes. She didn't mention health, didn't hint at doctors, didn't ask why he was worried. She avoided the question, as she had avoided the truth for months. This was not just a refusal to speak. It was a choice to continue lying. John leaned back on the sofa, his fingers clenched into a fist, but he immediately relaxed them. He won't show anger. Not now. She thinks that he is blind, that her lies are armor. But he saw everything: her nervousness, her evasiveness, her empty words. If she knows about chlamydia, she hides it, just like she hides Gavin. If she doesn't know, she's still guilty of bringing the disease into their home, into their bed. Either way, her lie was another nail he would drive into her future. Later, when Melissa went upstairs, John remained in the living room. He took out his phone and opened bank notifications. Her spending continued to grow. Yesterday, $340 at the Marina restaurant, Today, $200 at the boutique on Michigan Avenue. He saved everything, adding it to the evidence file. His trap worked. She spent family money on Gavin, on their secret evenings, not suspecting that every purchase was evidence against her. But now he knows more. Her lie today wasn't just personal, it was proof that she wouldn't stop. She will lie until he makes her pay. He went up to the office and opened the safe. There was a flash drive with a video of Melissa and Gavin at the motel, their betrayal in high definition. Next to it is a folder with documents, her reports, which he sent to the medical council, billing statements, a detective's report. He didn't add anything new, but he felt his plan getting tighter. Divorce, custody, her career, all this was part of the operation he carried out in his mind. Today's conversation was another scene tightening her fate. John closed the safe and went downstairs. Melissa was in the bedroom, her laptop open, typing something, her face illuminated by the screen. She didn't look up when he entered. "Aren't you going to sleep?" he asked, stopping at the door. "Soon," she answered without turning around. "We need to finish." "Don't overwork yourself," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Health is more important." She froze for a split second, then nodded. "Yeah, I know." John went into the bathroom, closed the door, and looked at himself in the mirror. His face was calm, but his eyes were burning. She lied. Again. And that was her mistake. He knew she wouldn't tell the truth, not about Gavin, not about the illness, not about herself. But he gave her a chance, and she failed it. He lay down in bed, feeling her warmth next to him, but not touching. His mind was as clear as before the operation. The medical council has already received her reports. The account recorded her expenses. The lawyer was preparing papers. Her every step was under his control, and she did not see how the net was tightening. He closed his eyes, but did not sleep. The next phase had already begun in his head, not just the revelation, but the blow that she would feel. Not today, but soon. Shadows trembled on the walls of the Evanston house as John Ramsey put the finishing touches on it. The dining room, usually austere and functional, was transformed. The white tablecloth flowed like silk, lilies in a crystal vase exuded a sweet aroma, candles in glass sconces flickered, casting golden reflections. Today he was not a heart surgeon, he was not a betrayed husband whose wife, Melissa, slept with Gavin Walsh and brought chlamydia into their bed. Today he was an actor creating a scene where every gesture, every look would be part of his plan. He knew her lies, her spending on hotels, her careless reports sent to the medical council, her evasiveness when he asked about her health. But he won't show anger. He will give her an illusion, a perfect evening where she will feel loved, not knowing that this is a trap. John thought about dinner 2 days ago when he looked at her phone, which lit up with another message. She thought he didn't see. She was wrong. Melissa was proud of their family, the facade she showed to the world. He decided to reinforce this facade by surrounding her with those who believed her lies. Her parents, Richard and Linda, and their son, Lucas. Let her sit at the table, laugh, and play a role. And he will smile, knowing that every smile is another step towards the abyss. He spent the morning doing business. While Melissa was at work, her code for meeting Gavin, John went to the market. He selected the ingredients with the same care he used to prepare the operating room. Veal fillet, fresh thyme, ripe tomatoes, a bottle of the Cabernet Sauvignon she had praised on their anniversary. He bought candles tall, white, so that the light was soft, and flowers, lilies, which she called her own. At home, he rearranged the furniture to make the table the centerpiece and set it, polishing the glasses until they shined. It wasn't an impulse, it was choreography. By lunchtime, he called Richard and Linda. They were in Wilmette, an hour away, and always enjoyed family reunions. John said he wanted to just get together, without any hint of a reason. Linda chirped about how long it had been since they had seen Lucas, and Richard asked if they needed some whiskey. John laughed lightly, naturally. They had no idea that they were being invited to the performance. Lucas was easier to convince. John picked him up from school, mentioning a cool dinner with his grandparents. Lucas grimaced, adult talk again, but agreed when he found out about the chocolate cake. John looked at his freckles, his quick smile, and felt his heart clench. Lucas was his anchor. For his sake, he kept his anger in check. For his sake, this evening had to be perfect. Melissa arrived home at 6, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She stopped in the doorway of the dining room, her bag frozen in her hand. The table sparkled, silver cutlery, folded napkins, flowers, candles. She blinked, her lips parting. "John, what is this?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of wariness in it. Some kind of holiday. He walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands with a towel. His shirt was rolled up to his elbows. His smile was open, almost boyish. "No holiday," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "I just wanted to please you. You're so busy with your work. I thought we'd have a family evening. Your parents are on their way. Lucas is already home. I hope you are free." Her eyes narrowed for a split second, but she nodded, her smile widening. "Of course I. This is so unexpected. Thanks, John." She stepped towards him, her hand touching his shoulder. "You are a miracle." He looked at her fingers thin with a new manicure. Her touch was once home, now evidence. But he leaned down, his lips lightly touching her temple. "Go change, Mel. It will be fun." By 7, the dining room came to life. The candles burned evenly, their light danced on the walls, lilies filled the air with sweetness. Richard and Linda arrived with a box of macaroons and a bottle of wine, their laughter echoing through the house. Lucas sat at the table, fiddling with his napkin, but his eyes lit up when John brought out the herbed veal. Melissa came down in a black dress, her hair flowing over her shoulders, her makeup highlighting her cheekbones. She looked like something out of a postcard, perfect, radiant. John pulled out a chair for her, his hand lingering on her back a little longer than necessary. She smiled, but he noticed how her fingers gripped the edge of the table. "John, this is just magical," Linda said, looking around the table. "You should have become a boss, not a doctor." "Don't exaggerate, Linda," he replied, serving the salad. His voice was light, his eyes sparkled. "I just wanted to gather everyone. Long time no see." Richard nodded, cutting off the meat. "You think correctly. Family is the main thing. You and Melissa are great. Keep up the good work." Melissa laughed, her hand resting on John's wrist. "Well, John is the main character here," she said, looking at him. "I'm just playing along." John smiled, his fingers intertwined with hers. His skin was warm, but his gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. He saw her play, her laughter, her gestures, her words, honed over the years. She was good, almost convincing, but he noticed how her eyes slid to the phone lying by her plate, how her leg twitched slightly under the table. He knew that she was waiting for something. Messages, apologies, lies. But he continued to smile, refilling the wine, making fun of Richard's fishing story. "Lou, how was school?" he asked, turning his gaze to his son. "Don't bully teachers." Lucas chuckled, stuffing a piece of bread into his mouth. "They bully me themselves. Miss Clark is talking about the essay again." "That's because you write like a gamer," John said, and everyone laughed. Even Melissa, but her laugh was a little harsher than necessary. John looked at her, his smile did not waver. He saw every crack, her tense shoulders, her fingers fiddling with her glass, her gaze that had avoided him for too long. "Melissa, why are you so quiet?" Richard asked, narrowing his eyes. "Are you exhausted by work?" She blinked, then smiled, brightly, like on stage. "A little, Dad. But this evening, it really lifts my spirits." She looked at John, her hand squeezing his. "You're the best." "I'm trying," he answered. His voice was soft, but his eyes bored into hers. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "For your sake, Mel." She nodded, her lips trembled, but she drank the wine, hiding it. John leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. He saw everything, her lies, her game, her fear hidden behind her makeup. This dinner was his field, not the operating room, but just as accurate. He held her hand, laughed with her parents, and joked with Lucas. And all this time he knew she was his patient, and he is a surgeon who has already chosen where to cut. The dining room of the Evanston house shone like a theater stage. The candles burn evenly, the lilies smell sweetly, the glasses caught the light, reflecting smiles. John Ramsey looked at Melissa sitting across from him, her hand in his, her laughter ringing out to her parents, Richard and Linda, and their son, Lucas. She played the role of an ideal wife, not knowing that the evening was his production. He knew everything: her infidelity with Gavin Walsh, the chlamydia she brought into their bed, her spending on hotels, her lies when he asked about her health. He collected evidence reports to the medical board, bank statements, videos of their motel nights. And now, while she smiled, he prepared to lower the curtain. Dinner went smoothly. Richard was talking about his gardening project. Linda was praising the veal. Lucas was complaining about his school tests. Melissa was in the center, her dress hugging her figure, her words flowing easily. But John saw the cracks, her fingers clutching the phone under the table, her gaze sliding to the screen, her laugh that sounded a little harsher than necessary. He smiled as he poured the wine, joked with Lucas, nodded to Linda. His hand touched Melissa warm, caring. She didn't see that his other hand was on the folder hidden under the tablecloth. Lucas yawned, rubbing his eyes. "Can I go?" he asked, looking at John. "Tomorrow training is early." John nodded, his smile soft. "Go, Lou. Good night." The boy hugged Linda, kissed Melissa on the cheek, and went upstairs, his steps fading on the stairs. John waited until the bedroom door slammed. He then turned to Melissa, his eyes meeting hers. She smiled, but her brows furrowed slightly, a slight hint of worry. "Chalk," he said, his voice calm, almost affectionate. "I wanted this evening to be special. For us. For the family." He paused, his fingers slowly letting go of her hand. "But there is something I must show." Richard and Linda looked at each other, their smiles frozen. Melissa blinked, her lips parting. "John, what are you talking about?" she asked. Her voice was light, but there was a shadow in it. He didn't answer. Instead, he took the folder out from under the tablecloth and placed it on the table, carefully, as if it were a dessert tray. The candles reflected on the glossy cover. He opened it, laying out the papers one by one. His test results: chlamydia trachomatis, positive. Printed screenshots of her correspondence with GW neutral, but too warm. A USB flash drive that he knew contained video from the motel. He did it slowly, without haste, his movements as precise as in the operating room. Melissa froze, her face paled, and her eyes widened. Linda gasped, covering her mouth. Richard frowned, his fork clunking on his plate. John looked at Melissa. His voice was even, without anger, but every word cut like a blade. "I didn't want to disgrace you in front of your son," he said, his gaze not leaving hers. "But you yourself made it a part of his life." Melissa opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Her hands trembled. She grabbed the edge of the table as if she was afraid to fall. "John, you're wrong," she breathed, her voice hoarse, almost pleading. "Am I mistaken?" He bowed his head, his smile disappeared, but his eyes remained cold as steel. "Chlamydia, Mel. I haven't slept with anyone but you. 15 years old. And you?" He pointed to the papers. "These are your messages. These are your evenings. And this," he touched the flash drive, "is your night with Gavin Walsh. I know everything." Linda gasped, her hand clutching Richard's elbow. "Melissa, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Melissa turned to her mother, her eyes sparkling, but she was not crying. "Mom, it's not what he says." "John, you misunderstood." John raised his hand to stop her. His voice became heavier, but still without shouting. "Don't lie. Not here. Not in front of them." He turned to Richard and Linda. His gaze was direct, but there was a rage in it, restrained by years of discipline. "I respected you. I considered you family, but you raised your daughter poorly. If she jumps into bed with other men, knowing that we have a son, that we have a life, that's on you. You didn't teach her honor." Richard turned purple and his fists clenched. "Watch your language, John," he barked. "This is my daughter, and this is my marriage," John snapped, his voice like the blow of a whip. "And my pain. She lied to you just like she did to me. Ask her. Ask why she won't look you in the eye." Linda began to cry, her shoulders shaking. Melissa jumped up, her chair creaking. "Enough, John," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You can't. You don't dare say that." He looked at her, his face as motionless as a mask. "I dare, Melissa, because you ruined everything." He paused, his gaze becoming sharper. "And you should go to the hospital. Get checked. Chlamydia may not be everything. I don't know how many men you've slept with. Maybe there's something more serious there." Her face contorted a mixture of shock, shame, and anger. She stepped back, her hand clutching the back of the chair. You're sick," she breathed. "How can you?" "Sick?" He raised his eyebrows, his voice was almost soft, but there was a ring of steel in it. "It was you who brought the disease to our house, to our family, into Luca's life. Think about it, Mel. Think carefully." Richard stood up, his face was purple, but he was silent, looking first at his daughter and then at John. Linda was crying, her hands covering her face. Melissa stood there, her breathing heavy, her eyes darting between the papers and John. She didn't cry, not yet. But her world was cracking, and John saw it. He didn't shout or hit the table with his fist. He just watched, his words a scalpel cutting through her lies. The candles burned out, their light weakened, the shadows deepened. The folder lay on the table like a sentence. John leaned back in his chair, his arms folded over his chest. He did what he wanted. He showed her the truth. He showed them all. Not for the sake of drama, but for her own sake, so that she understands that her game is over. He waited for her to say what she would do. But the next step was already ticking in his head, invisible, cold, precise. The dining room of the Evanston house became an arena where candles burned out and tension filled the air. A folder with evidence John's test results, screenshots of Melissa's correspondence, a flash drive with a video of her infidelity with Gavin Walsh lay on the table like a verdict. John Ramsey had just exposed her lies to her parents, Richard and Linda, blaming them for their daughter's poor upbringing and hinting to Melissa about other illnesses she might have contracted. His voice was cold, without shouting, but every word cut deeper than a scalpel. Melissa stood clutching the back of the chair, her face a mask of shock and anger. Now it was her turn to speak, and John waited, watching as she drowned in her own lies. Melissa trembled, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry, not yet. Her lips trembled as she looked at the papers, then at John, then at her parents. Linda, her mother, sat with wet cheeks, her hands covering her face. Richard, purple with rage, clenched his fists but remained silent, his gaze darting between his daughter and son-in-law. Melissa stepped forward, her voice breaking as she spoke. "John, it's not. It's not what you think," she shouted, her hands flying up, pointing at the folder. "You got it all wrong. It's Gavin. He set me up." Her words came out in a flood, fast, almost inaudible. "He was following me, John. He was intrusive. I didn't want to. I tried to stop, but he—" John looked at her, his face as motionless as marble. He didn't interrupt, didn't raise his voice, didn't blink. His eyes, dark and sharp, bored into her, but he was silent. Every word she said was a lie, and he knew it. The motel video, her laughter, her hands on Gavin, it was all voluntary. The chlamydia he treated was her gift, not an accident. But he let her talk, let her dig a deeper hole for herself. Melissa turned to her parents, her voice becoming higher, pleading. "Mom, Dad, you know me. I would never. It was him, Gavin, who manipulated me. I was under pressure, work, all this." She trailed off, tears finally pouring out, rolling down her cheeks. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, her makeup smudged. "John, tell me you believe me. Tell me we can fix this." Linda sobbed louder, her shoulders shaking. "Melissa, how could you?" She whispered, her voice full of pain. "You have a son, a family." "Mom, I didn't want to." Melissa took a step towards her, but Richard raised his hand to stop her. "Enough," he barked, his voice hoarse. "You heard what John said. This is a shame." He looked at his son-in-law, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and shame. John, I don't know what to say. John didn't answer. He still looked at Melissa. His silence was heavier than a scream. She blamed Gavin, cried, begged, but he saw right through her. Her tears weren't about regret, they were about fear. Fear of losing face, family, the life he gave her. He felt anger boiling in his chest, but his face remained calm. He won't give her power over his emotions. Not now. Melissa fell into a chair, her hands covering her face, sobbing, her shoulders shaking. "John, please," she whispered through her tears. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. We can. We can make things better." He leaned a little closer. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but every word hit like a hammer. "Set it up. You lied to my face. Lied to Lucas. Lied to them." He nodded at Richard and Linda. "You made your choice, Melissa, and now you will live with him." She gasped, her eyes widened, but she couldn't find the words. John straightened up, his gaze sliding over his parents. Linda was crying. Richard was looking at the floor, his fists still clenched. The folder lay open on the table, its contents like a wound that no one could stitch up. John didn't say another word. He stood up, carefully folded his napkin, and left the dining room, leaving them in silence, broken only by Melissa's sobs. Saturday morning was gray, and the skies overcast over Evanston. John didn't sleep. He lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling while the house was silent. Melissa stayed in their bedroom. He heard her walking back and forth half the night, her steps heavy as her lies. Richard and Linda left immediately after dinner, their goodbyes short, their faces ashen. John didn't spare them. They raised a woman who ruined his life. But Lucas was innocent, and John knew he must protect his son from this poison. He got up at dawn, made coffee, and checked his phone. No messages from Melissa, no calls. She hid, licked her wounds, and came up with new lies. He wasn't going to look for her. Today, he thought only about Lucas. The boy didn't hear what happened yesterday. John made sure he went to bed before it started. But he will feel that something is wrong. And John did not want him to live in this house, where the truth now hung as best he could. By 8 in the morning, he had packed his bag, a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, a laptop. Then he went to Lucas's room. The boy was sleeping. His hair was sticking out in all directions. The blanket had slipped to the floor. John sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand gently touching his son's shoulder. "Lou," he called quietly. "Wake up, buddy." Lucas stirred, his eyes opening slightly. "Dad," he muttered. "How much time?" "It's early," John smiled, but his smile was tired. "Let's go. You and I are going to Grandma's. Let's stay with Grandma for now." Lucas sat up, rubbing his eyes. "To Grandma Jane?" he asked, referring to John's mother, who lived in suburban Milwaukee. "What happened? Is Mom coming too?" John paused, his hand gripping his son's shoulder a little tighter. "Mom needs to sort things out," he said evenly. "You and I will just relax for a couple of days. Grandma promised me a pie. And there's that old bike of yours, remember?" Lucas nodded, but his gaze was wary. "And, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice quieter. John looked into his eyes, his heart sank. He wanted to tell the truth that his mother was lying, that she had betrayed them, that this house was no longer home. But instead he smiled, his hand ruffling Lucas' hair. "Everything will be fine, Lou," he said. "Get ready. I'm downstairs." Lucas nodded, still sleepy, and reached for his t-shirt. John left, closing the door. He went down to the living room, where the dining room still held traces of yesterday empty glasses, a crumpled tablecloth. The folder with the evidence was on the table. He did not put it away. Let Melissa see. Let him know that he will not back down. He took his keys and his bag and waited for Lucas at the door. His face was calm, but inside he felt something changing. He didn't just protect his son. He was leading him away from her lies, her world, her poison. This was not the end. It was a step. And he knew the next one would be even more accurate. The drive to John's mother's house in Milwaukee was quiet. Only the radio blared old rock music, and Lucas dozed in the passenger seat. John held the steering wheel, his eyes glued to the highway, but his thoughts circled around last night's dinner. A folder with evidence tests, screenshots, a flash drive with a video of Melissa and Gavin Walsh remained on the table like a mine, ready to blow up her world. Her tears, her lies, her attempts to blame Gavin still rang in his ears. He didn't answer then, didn't shout, didn't argue. His silence was his strength. And now, as he took Lucas away from her poison, he knew that his plan was beginning to work. Melissa didn't call. Her phone was silent all night and morning, and John did not wait for her calls. He gave her the truth: chlamydia, her betrayal to her parents, Richard and Linda. He told her to check her health, hinting at the worst, and left her to drown in it. But that was just the beginning. Reports he anonymously sent to the Illinois Medical Board, her hotel and restaurant expenses recorded in the family account were all threads he was pulling, and now they have begun to drag on. On Monday, 2 days after the dinner, John received a call from Allison Keller, his lawyer. He was in the hospital between surgeries when her number flashed on the screen. He closed himself in the office and answered. His voice was even. "John, there's news," Keller said, her tone businesslike, but with a hint of satisfaction. Grace Clinic received a request from the medical council, checking the finances of the Novartis project. "Your wife is suspended as of today." John exhaled, his fingers gripping the phone. "Already?" he asked, even though he knew his anonymous complaint would work. He sent Melissa's reports, inflated expenses, questionable invoices, sloppy letters. Nothing egregious, but enough to get things going. "Yes," Keller confirmed. "The council acts quickly when there is a smell of violation. She hasn't been fired yet, but suspension is a bad sign. If they find something serious, she will lose her job. Maybe a license." "Okay," John said, his voice cold. "What's next?" "We are ready to file for divorce. I made a petition, no mention of guilt, so as not to delay. Custody. Lucas lives with you. You are his primary caregiver. Her removal will play into our hands instability, dubious reputation. Courts love stability for children. Would you like me to submit today?" John paused, looking at his desk where Lucas' football game photo lay. "Yes," he said finally. "Serve it, and custody too." "It will be done," Keller replied. "I'll let you know when the papers go to court. Keep me posted if she starts pushing." "She won't start," John said, and it was true. Melissa was too busy with herself, her tears, her lies, her fear. By the end of the week, the news reached the hospital sidelines. John heard snippets of gossip in the cafeteria. Grace was under attack. An audit had revealed spending problems. Melissa Ramsey was taking a leave of absence. He drank coffee. His face was expressionless, but inside he felt cold satisfaction. The suspension became a firing on Friday. Melissa was officially fired from Grace after an audit confirmed violations: inflated bills, improper spending, signatures on decisions that cost the clinic a grant. Nothing criminal yet. But the medical council began an investigation, and her name was now whispered with a tinge of shame. John learned this from a colleague who worked with Grace. "I feel sorry for her," he said at lunch. "It was a good career." John nodded, his fork hovering over his salad. "Yes, it's a pity," he answered, and not a single muscle on his face moved. He didn't regret it. She built her career on ambition, and now her ambition has burned her out. Gavin Walsh appears to have disappeared. John expected Melissa to run to him, begging for support, but rumors had reached here too. Walsh had taken a vacation, his phone was not answered. His assistant at Elite Clinic was muttering something about personal matters. John wasn't surprised. Gavin was a predator, and predators flee when they smell a storm. He left Melissa alone, leaving her to drown in the wreckage of her reputation. Her name was now associated not only with Grace, but also with whispers of unprofessionalism and dubious connections. The medical world in Chicago was small, and gossip spread faster than a virus. John didn't call her or write to her. He stayed in Milwaukee with his mother, Jane, in her cozy home with the smell of cinnamon and creaking floors. Lucas rode his bike, played with the neighbors' dogs, and ate his grandmother's pies. John looked at his son and knew that he had done the right thing by taking him away from Melissa, but he couldn't hide forever. It was time to finish. On Monday, he returned to Chicago alone, leaving Lucas with Jane. He met Keller in her office, where she handed him papers. The divorce petition was ready, a 60/40th division of property in his favor, taking into account his contribution to the house and Lucas. Full custody for John, with visitation rights for Melissa if the court approves. Keller added bank statements Melissa's spending on restaurants, hotels, boutiques, and a detective's report about her relationship with Gavin. "This is not for the court," Keller said, pointing to the report. "But if she struggles, we will use it. She is not in a position to dictate terms." John nodded, flipping through the documents. His signature lay on every page, even like a cut. "Give it today," he said. "I want this to end." Keller looked at him, her gaze attentive. "You hold on, John, but if it gets hard, tell me. This is not an operating room." "I know," he answered, but his voice was firm. This was operating room Melissa was a patient whose lies poisoned his life, and he cut it out not out of anger, but out of necessity. By evening, the papers went to court. John returned to the empty house, where the smell of lilies from dinner still hung in the air. The dining room was cleared, and the evidence file was in his safe. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat down in the living room, and looked at their wedding photo on the shelf. Melissa smiled, her eyes shining. Then he believed her. Now he saw only lies. His phone beeped with a notification from Keller. "Petition submitted. We expect a response in 10 days. John leaned back in his chair, his fingers gripping his glass. Melissa lost her job, her reputation, Gavin. Soon she will lose her family. He felt no joy, only cold relief. This was not the end. But it was a step that he took without trembling in his hands. Silence in John's house was the new norm, but it was as calm as an operating room before a difficult case. A week had passed since he filed for divorce and custody of Lucas, took his son to his mother in Milwaukee, and returned to Chicago to finish what he started. Melissa lost her job at Grace when a medical board audit, prompted by his anonymous complaint, found irregularities, and she was fired. Gavin Walsh disappeared, leaving her behind, and her reputation crumbled like sand. John didn't call her, didn't look for a meeting. His plan was working. Her career, her facade, her lies, everything was falling apart. But he knew that the final blow was yet to come. Melissa, meanwhile, couldn't ignore John's words from that dinner. "Get checked. Maybe there's something more serious there." Her tears, her accusations against Gavin, her attempts to justify herself to her parents did not erase his cold warning. Chlamydia was a reality. She was tested at a private clinic the day after dinner, and the result confirmed her guilt. But the fear of something worse, HIV, syphilis, hepatitis, gnawed at her from the inside. She couldn't pretend anymore that she had everything under control. On Wednesday, she signed up for a full examination, choosing another clinic, away from familiar faces, where her name was not yet whispered with contempt. She sat in the doctor's office, clutching her purse, her nails digging into her skin. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, was leafing through her chart. Melissa waited, her breathing shallow, her thoughts racing. She knew that Gavin was not the only one. There were casual connections, fleeting consolations at conferences, on business trips. She didn't think about the consequences then. Now she was waiting for the verdict. "Mrs. Ramsey," the doctor began, her voice was even, "chlamydia has been confirmed, but you have already started treatment, right?" Melissa nodded, her throat tightening. "Fine. However, there is something else. Your HIV test is positive. We retested to rule out the error. The result is the same." Melissa froze, her eyes widened, the world around her shrank to a point. "HIV?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Is this accurate?" "Yes," the doctor nodded, her tone becoming softer. "This is not the end, Melissa. There is treatment. You can live with it for a long time. But you need to start therapy immediately. And inform your partners. This is the law." Melissa didn't hear the rest. Her mind was spinning. Gavin, the others, John, Lucas. She tried to hide chlamydia, denied it to John, but HIV, it was too much. She walked out of the clinic, her steps unsteady, her hands shaking as she dialed Gavin's number. The subscriber is unavailable. He left her. She was left alone with a diagnosis that she could not hide. The trial took place 2 weeks later in the gray Chicago District Courthouse. John sat next to Allison Keller, his lawyer, his suit immaculate, his face as calm as before surgery. Lucas stayed with Grandma Jane, not knowing that his future was being decided that day. Melissa entered the room, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, her face pale, shadows under her eyes. She looked smaller than before, not the shining project coordinator, but a woman whose life had fallen apart. Her lawyer, a young guy with nervous hands, whispered something to her, but she barely listened. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, opened the hearing. The divorce was a formality. John and Melissa signed an agreement on the division of property, leaving her with the minimum: a car, part of the savings, no rights to the house. But custody of Lucas has become a battleground. Melissa stood up, her voice weak but determined. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes flickering to John, then to the judge, "I ask you to leave Lucas with me. I'm his mother. He needs me. John, he works around the clock. He won't be able to give him what I can. I love my son." The judge nodded, her pen hovering over the papers. "Mr. Ramsey, what is your answer?" Keller stood up, her voice as hard as steel. "Your Honor, my client has been Lucas' primary guardian for the past few months. He is stable, financially secure, and actively participates in his son's life. Mrs. Ramsey, on the other hand, has lost her job due to professional misconduct. Her finances are unstable, her behavior questionable." She paused, her gaze sliding to Melissa. "We have evidence that calls into question her ability to care for the child." Melissa's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "What evidence?" she blurted out. "This is a lie." Keller opened the folder, her movements precise. "Medical certificates, Your Honor. Mrs. Ramsey has been diagnosed with HIV. She hid this from her husband, from her family, from the court. This is not only a matter of health, but also of her honesty. She did not inform her partners as required by law. She cannot provide a safe environment for Lucas." The hall froze. Melissa turned pale, her mouth opened, but the words stuck. Her lawyer stood up, his voice high-pitched. "This is confidential information. How do they?" "This was obtained legally," Keller interrupted, handing the documents to the judge. "Mr. Ramsey learned of her condition through a private detective hired to protect the child's interests. Her diagnosis confirms her irresponsibility. She put not only herself, but also her family at risk." The judge took the certificates. Her eyes ran over the lines. Melissa fell into a chair, her hands covering her face. "It's not fair," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to. I didn't know." John looked at her, his face motionless. He felt no pity. She hid HIV like she hid Gavin, like she hid chlamydia. Her lie was her choice, and now she was paying. He remembered her tears at dinner, her accusations of Gavin, her pleas. It was all empty. She destroyed herself. The judge looked up, her voice dry as paper. "Given the evidence presented, I see that Mrs. Ramsey is unable to provide stability and safety for the child. Full custody is given to the father, John Ramsey. Mrs. Ramsey is entitled to supervised visits, subject to medical supervision and compliance with the law. The divorce is approved. The meeting is over." The hammer struck, and the echo echoed throughout the hall. Melissa gasped, her eyes filled with tears. She looked at John, but he did not answer. He stood up, nodded to Keller, and walked out, his steps even. She remained seated. Her lawyer muttered something, but she did not listen. Her world collapsed: her job, her reputation, her son. She was in shock, her hands were shaking, but no one came. Even her parents, Richard and Linda, didn't come. They hadn't spoken to her since that dinner. John got into the car, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. Lucas will stay with him. His son was safe, away from her lies, her illnesses, her choices. He started the engine and drove to Milwaukee, to Jane, to Lucas. His face was calm, but inside he felt the last knot being untied. He didn't just win. He cut her out of their lives cleanly, precisely, like a surgeon. The autumn wind blew leaves through a cemetery in the suburbs of Chicago, where the grass had already withered and the sky hung low, gray, like an old X-ray. A year has passed since John Ramsey won custody of Lucas, and Melissa has lost everything: her job, her reputation, her family. Her HIV, which she hid, became her death sentence. She died 3 months ago, alone, in a hospital room, from an infection contracted while her immune system was weakened. John did not visit her, did not call, did not forgive her. He learned of her death from Richard, her father, whose voice on the phone was as dry as an autumn leaf. "She's gone, John. Funeral on Saturday." He didn't go to them. But today he stood here at her grave with Lucas next to her. The stone was simple gray granite, the name Melissa Ramsey, dates of birth and death. No flowers, no messages of love or sorrow. Her parents, Richard and Linda, stopped communicating with John after the trial, their communication with Lucas being limited to occasional letters. Gavin Walsh never showed up. His traces disappeared somewhere outside of Chicago, leaving Melissa alone in her fall. John didn't look for him. It was enough for him to know that her world had collapsed as he had planned, coldly, precisely, without unnecessary noise. Lucas stood nearby, his shoulders slumped, his hands in his jacket pockets. He was 12, but the shadow of an adult already appeared in his eyes, a pain that he did not know how to name. He hadn't seen his mother since John took him to Grandma Jane's in Milwaukee. The court allowed Melissa supervised visits, but she did not take advantage of them, either out of shame or fear. Lucas asked about her in the first months. His voice was quiet. "Dad, will Mom come back?" John answered honestly. "I don't know, Lou." Then the questions subsided, but the pain remained. When Jane called and said that Lucas learned about his mother's death from a letter from Linda, John realized that he could not hide his son from the truth. Lucas cried then, not loudly, but quietly, buried in the pillow, while Jane stroked his back. He didn't talk to John about it, but his eyes were different, dull, as if someone had turned off the light. John decided to bring him here to the grave, not for Melissa's sake, but for Lucas's sake. The son needed to be seen, to say goodbye, to be let go as much as possible for a boy whose mother betrayed him during his lifetime. They stood in silence, the wind ruffling Lucas' hair, his breathing uneven. John looked at the stone. His face was calm, but inside he felt something new: not anger, not relief, but emptiness, like after a long operation, when the patient left and you were left with the instruments in your hands. He didn't feel sorry for her. She destroyed their family, her lies, her choices, her illness. It was all her burden. But Lucas didn't deserve this burden. "Dad," Lucas' voice was hoarse, and he didn't look up from the ground. "Why didn't she fight? She could have been treated, right?" John turned to him, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. He knew Melissa had started therapy after her diagnosis. Richard had mentioned it on the same call. But she didn't take care of herself, skipped appointments, and drank when she shouldn't. Her body gave in as the infection, pneumonia, amplified by HIV, took the last of her strength. He could lie to Lucas, say she tried, but it didn't work. But he chose the truth as soft as possible. "She tried, Lou," he said quietly. "But sometimes people lose too much to hold on." Her illness was worse. Lucas nodded, his lips pursed, his eyes sparkling. He stepped closer to the grave. His hand reached out to the stone, but froze in the air. "I miss her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Even after everything, I wanted her to be with us." John felt something tighten in his chest. He couldn't give his son the mother he wanted, the one who laughed with him at dinner, the one who read books to him before bed. That Melissa died before her body, lost in her lies, in her nights with Gavin, in her betrayal. But he could give Lucas himself a father who would not break. "I know," he said, his voice firm but soft. "And that's okay, Lou. You are her son. You will always love her. But now we have each other, and we can handle it." Lucas nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. He stood there for a minute, looking at his mother's name, then turned to John. "Can I go?" he asked quietly. John nodded but didn't move. He looked at the grave, his eyes running over the carved letters. A year ago, he uncovered her life, her betrayal, her illness, her career with surgical precision. He won custody, protected Lucas, freed himself from her shadows. Now she lay here, all traces of her gone, her job, her reputation, her family. But the stains remained in Lucas's heart, in his memory, in their past. He stepped closer to the stone, his voice low, almost a whisper so Lucas wouldn't hear. "The tracks are disappearing," he said, his words disappearing into the wind. "But the stains remain. Thank you for giving me a chance to be free." He felt no bitterness, no victory. It was a statement cold, like his scalpel. She gave him freedom with her death, but not with her will. Her choices, her lies, her end, all this was her path, and he chose his. He turned, his hand resting on Lucas's shoulder, and they walked to the car, their steps crunching on the leaves. Lucas was silent the entire way, his gaze glued to the window. John didn't force him to talk. He knew that his son needed time to understand, to forgive, to move on. They returned to Milwaukee, to Jane, where the smell of pie and the warm light of the kitchen awaited them. Lucas went to his room, and John sat down with his mother at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "How is he?" Jane asked, her eyes full of worry. "Not good," John replied, his voice level. "But he is strong. He'll get through it." Jane nodded, her hand touching his. "And you?" He looked at her. His lips trembled slightly, not a smile, but a shadow of relief. "I'm free, Mom. For the first time in a long time." She squeezed his hand, and they sat there in silence until evening fell over the house. Melissa was the past, a grave, a name, a stain. John and Lucas were real, and he knew his son would survive this. They will both survive. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.